Hi everyone, welcome to the second part of the Assignment 3 overview video for EDSS 311. So in this video, I'm going to share with you the different syllabuses for Stage 6 that you have the option of using in this assignment. The great thing about not putting this in the other video is that you can skip past all the sections that don't apply to the syllabus that you're going to be using for the assignment. What I'm going to do in this video is actually be specific about some of the details to do with the assignment related to your syllabus, and also demonstrate a little bit about what your syllabus looks like, because there are some details that are important for you as you go into trimester 2. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order, starting with ancient history and ending with studies of religion. Okay, so ancient history. Let's download that. All right, so the ancient history syllabus sort of looks like the syllabus that we had just been using for the year 7 to 10. It's sort of set up differently, which is kind of handy for those of you who are doing the ancient history syllabus. All right, let's just go to the units of work and have a look. We've got the aim of the ancient history syllabus, the objectives, the outcome table, skill-based outcomes, course structure and requirement. Now, when you are working on this assignment and you go to, I'll just show you what document I'm referring to. So this is the one that you click on here. What are the knowledge and understanding and skill-based outcomes in the Stage 6 syllabuses? So you can see here that I've put everything into different sections. So the outcomes that are related to knowledge and understanding are listed here, and the skill-based outcomes are listed here. There's also referral to the ones that you can't use. So if we go back and have a look at the outcomes, you can see that I've just hidden these two, the -9 ones, and put them based on this. So it's pretty easy. Once you see the outcome table, you can see how it's broken up. So for your knowledge and understanding outcome, you're choosing from here. Skill-based outcome, you're choosing from here. Now, this is the important part here I want to show you. Course structure and requirements. In year 11, this is designated to 120 hours. So in ancient history, the focus is on investigating ancient history, or 60 hours focusing on the nature of ancient history and different case studies. Each case study should be a minimum of 10 indicative hours. Then for 40 hours, students are looking at features of ancient societies and historical investigation for 20 hours. Now, if you look here at investigating ancient history, we've got these two sections of that focus that you'll be looking at when you're teaching this. Students take at least one option from the nature of ancient history and 2 case studies. So 1 from here and 2 from here. One of the case studies needs to be from Egypt, Greece, Rome, or Celtic Europe, and then one needs to be from here. So if we remember that, and you go through to, we won't look at year 12 yet. Let's just go straight to year 11. Sort of repetitive, isn't it? So here's investigating ancient history, the nature of ancient history. You can see the outcomes here for that unit. Students need to look at one of these. So as the teacher, you are choosing one of these 6 as a unit of work. And then underneath that, each of those are broken down. So you as the teacher, if you had chosen the investigation of ancient sites and sources, then this would be your unit of work. It's not really a lot there, is there? It's obviously a different context that you're choosing. So you can choose one of these. Now, if you, for the assignment, what you can do for that second topic is you could do the same unit here, and you could choose one of these examples to do your learning sequence on, or 2 or 3. And then that extra one, second topic could be one of the other ones, just to extend that knowledge on that. So you've got all these different options, 1, 2, 3, it goes up to 6, if you remember. And then we've got the case studies, remembering that one needs to be from that top section of options and then one from the other one. And these are the outcomes for the case studies. So these are the example, list A and list B. You need to have one from list A, one from list B. But in both cases, these are the outcomes that are addressed, okay? Now, if remembering back to the case studies and also investigating ancient history, that's 60 hours. So having a look at the different case studies. So if you chose A1, Old Kingdom Egypt, or Tut's Tomb, that would be one that I would like to choose. That would be fun. Let's go to that one. Remembering that, again, this is all 60 hours. So how do you know what's 4 hours? 4 hours isn't a lot. Because if you think about the fact that you need to spend time initiating, getting students to be interested in the topic, there's not a lot of time to gather. So you probably, in terms of dot points, would maybe choose a couple of dot points, thinking about what prior knowledge students would need to know. So again, you could choose to do your sequence on Old Kingdom Egypt, and then that second topic could be Tut's Tomb. So your question will be very general, so that you can ask a question in such a way that they could, again, sort of answer it looking at Tut's Tomb, okay, or any of these other subjects, any of these other topics, okay, Troy, whatever. So let's just head back to that top section. Okay, so these are the case studies. In year 11, students have done the 2 case studies, remembering, and they've done this first unit, investigating ancient history, choosing one of these. So that's 3 topics. One of these, 2 case studies. So that's just some sort of information on how the ancient history syllabus is set up. Keeping in mind the amount of hours per section here, and in determining how many dot points, I suppose, is 4 hours, you can sort of have a look at the 60 hours and think about what would fit into 4 hours. It's sort of a trial thing. It's not always going to be perfect. I mean, when we go into teaching, often we have all these ideas about how we're going to fit all this in, and it doesn't work. It depends on the class. It depends on a lot of factors. A lot of the content in the ancient history syllabus is suitable for inquiry, I'd have to say. It really is. So I know I said that not all sections are applicable for inquiry, but for ancient history, it often actually is. Let's look at year 12, just before I move on to the next syllabus. All right. So in year 12, there are 4 sort of units. We've got the core study, cities of Vesuvius, then ancient societies, personalities in their times, and historical periods. All 30 hours. All 30 hours. Going to each of these sections, right, so there's no option on that number 1. And then you get to choose between these different ones. So if we go and have a look, wait a second, there was another instruction there. You need to have a focus on at least 2 of these areas. So that means you can't just focus on Egypt for all of year 12. You need to have a little bit of variety, I suppose. So we've got that core study. Now, ancient society, this is the first one. These are the options that you can choose from. All these outcomes here are relevant to any of these choices that you make. So it doesn't matter which one you choose, you are going to be addressing these outcomes. So just remember that listed at the top there. Now, if we go past all these options, then we've got personalities and their times. I love this unit. And students will be looking at one of these. Again, these are the outcomes for any of these personalities that you choose. So, and it goes like that for the 4 different units of work. Probably one of the easier syllabuses to get your head around is the ancient history one. I love the syllabus. I'm not sure exactly what the new one's going to look like just yet. But I suspect that there might not be a lot of changes simply because this one was updated, I believe, in 2017. Yes, it was. So I'm hoping that helps break down a little bit about what sort of sections would be suitable for inquiry. Again, ancient history, you can't go wrong with a lot of sections. Ancient history is really good for those of you who want to, well, you'll need to have that second topic. So it sort of gives it to you here. If you just stay within a unit and choose one of the other options, then you can sort of have your general question and then use 2 different examples. So learning sequence 1, focusing on Tut's tomb, and then for the second topic, choosing some of the other options or one of the other options that was there. That's pretty easy. And I've showed you the outcomes, which ones you can use, making sure that these are the year 11 ones, these are the year 12 ones, 11 and 12. And if we just quickly go to that, I just want to show you quickly. Remembering that it's often not much of a difference between the 2, but enough that one is year 11 and one is year 12. So for example, 11-5 examines the significance of historical features, people, places, events, and developments of the ancient world. Assesses the significance of historical features. One thing I will say is that, do you have to address everything in the outcome? No, you don't. That's not realistic. So for example, if you're choosing 11-5, if you wanted students to produce some sort of product where they examine examines the significance of historical features and events, but not the other ones, that's completely fine. All right, so that's it for the ancient history one. Let's move on to the next one. All right, business studies. So this one's older, so it'll be good to have this one updated. You can tell that it looks a lot different from what we're used to. So we've got the rationale for business studies in stage 6. The aim and the objectives sort of follows the same sort of suit as the other syllabuses we've looked at. The course structure, we're looking at a breakdown of what students do in year 11. So that's the preliminary course structure, and year 12, the HSC course structure. So in year 11, students are looking at the nature of business, business management, business planning. And in year 12, students are looking at operations, marketing, finance, human resources. And similar to other syllabuses, it shows you how many hours are dedicated to each course. Again, we have the outcome table here. And if you go back and have a look at the outcome table, you will see that I've broken everything down into knowledge and understanding objectives and skill-based objectives, and copied in what they are related to business studies. And the outcomes that you can't use, which is pretty much just communicate. Noticing the codes and how they're different. So in business studies, it's P for the preliminary and H for year 12, the HSC. Different from ancient history, just as a note, because that's AH. Okay, going back to this. The interesting thing about the business studies syllabus is that it sort of aligns the outcomes with the objectives specifically, rather than puts the objectives up at the top and then just has the rest of them underneath. Neither way is better than the other. I think this way is kind of neat because it sort of directly links it to the outcome, so that can be handy. Okay, so section on key competencies. It just breaks down overall what each unit looks at. All right, so in year 11, students look at the nature of business first up. That's the first thing that they do. And we can see which outcomes are aligning with this unit of work. Again, if you decide I'm going to do a learning sequence on this year 11 topic, this unit, sorry, and you're not sure which ones of these are skill-based outcomes or knowledge and understanding, then you just simply go here, and I've got it listed for you. So it's pretty easy if you're not sure. But again, flipping back to that table at the beginning, it's sort of broken down, kind of easy to just to decipher from there. So the content, students are learning to examine contemporary business issues, investigate aspects of business using hypothetical situation, actual business case studies, role of business, types of businesses, influences in the business environment, business growth and decline. In terms of what's inquiry-based material, I would say you need to be a bit picky in the business studies syllabus. You wouldn't want to just identify problems that arise for stakeholders when companies go into liquidation, because identification, you could do that within a learning sequence, but you wouldn't just do a learning sequence just to identify problems. You probably want to have something more than just that. I would say that if you were going to choose something, just as a side note, that is underneath, so the last 2 dot points, you really need to make sure that your prior knowledge is identifying all the stuff that came before that students would have learned, because it really does sort of flow on. In terms of 4 hours of work, as I've said with the other syllabuses, it is hard to say. It's not going to be a lot. You may decide to choose the rule of business and have a learning sequence based on that. And just see how much you can fit in. You may find that it's a bit too much or it's just right. In terms of thinking about your learning sequence in business studies and that second topic, often these case studies sections can be a good idea. And that's what I said about some of the other syllabuses too. The case studies really give you an opportunity to look at one case study, so investigating aspects of business in one case study, and that second topic can be a different case study to sort of build on that question. So wherever you see types of case studies, or you could create a case study to investigate some of these topics, that's a really good idea too. So in year 11, the second unit is business management. Have a look through there. Again, we've got case studies. So having a look for those case studies can be really helpful. Business planning. Again, we've got case studies. So I would draw your attention to those sections. I think that would be really good. Be a good idea. So remembering that you've got 4 options in the units of work for year 12. That was pretty easy, actually. It's not too bad. Just being picky about what you choose as important for the learning sequence that you choose. So I think we'll move on to the next one. Just remembering when you get to choosing your outcomes that you make sure that your knowledge and understanding outcome is from this list, and your skill-based outcome is either 7, 8, or 10. The other thing I wanted you to think about, which I will say for all of the other syllabuses as well, so I'm just going to come back to this. What you'll notice here, it's a little bit more distinct here actually for business studies. You can see a little bit of connection between year 11 and 12 in terms of the outcomes, but because sometimes it's only a difference of the cognitive verb, but here I can see it's a little bit more than that. So for example, P2 explains the internal and external influences on businesses, whereas for year 12, they're evaluating management strategies in response to changes in internal and external influences. We're just keeping note of that. Some are a little bit more similar syllabuses and some are quite different. Okay, so take notice of that. All right, let's go on to the next syllabus, which is economics. All right, economics looks the same almost as business studies, 2009, and we'll be eager to see the new one for that. Same sort of format for the rationale for economics in the stage 6 curriculum. Have a read through that. The aim and objectives, and the course structure. What is it? All right, preliminary, that means year 11. HSC means year 12. So what units do students need to study in year 11 economics? Introduction to economics, consumers and business, markets, labor markets, financial markets, and government and the economy. And on the side here, it shows you how many hours. So interesting, introduction to economics, only 12 hours. It's pretty small in comparison to some of the others. For example, in ancient history, it was 60. Business studies, it was, I can't remember offhand, what was it, 30 or something. And then in year 12, students are looking at the global economy, Australia's place in the global economy, economic issues, and economic policies and management, all 30 hours. Same as business studies in year 12. Each of the 4 units have 30 hours. Okay, so have a look at those, have a think about what you might be interested in, and we can flip down to the units in a second. We've got this similar table that we're seeing in all of the syllabuses, the objectives here on the side, and also the outcomes that sort of align with those objectives. If you go to the outcome table and look at the economics section, you can see the objectives listed here. I've put them in, and which of the outcomes are sort of underneath those objectives, okay? So going back to the syllabus, I'll just point out now, as I've said, sometimes it's just the cognitive verb that's quite different between the year 11 outcome and the year 12, but sometimes it's a little bit more distinct. So for example, in year 11, students compare and contrast aspects of different economies. But in year 12, it analyzes the impact of global markets on the Australian and global economies. So similar, but that compare and contrast moves up to analysis of impact of global markets on Australia, rather than just looking at different economies. So that global aspect really comes into year 12. So you can see a little bit of difference there. Spend some time looking at the differences there, and also those units of work, and see what you're interested in focusing on. Now, the first unit in year 11 is, we're looking at before, Introduction to Economics. Was that only 12 hours, but it shows you what outcomes are relevant to that unit of work. Coming in and having a look, set up a little bit differently. Students are examining economic issues, applying economic skills. Students are learning about the nature of economics, the operation of an economy, and economy's similarities and differences. So what can you use in an inquiry sequence? Well, you can use anything you'd like, but what would be suitable? Because you really need to be thinking about that second topic. This would be something that you could do here. For example, looking at the Australian economy and all these different aspects, and then up somewhere in Asia. So having that as your second topic. Same thing as what I said in the other syllabuses I've looked at so far, that those case study style investigations are really suitable for this assignment, because you are getting students to look at one thing and then comparing and contrasting it with another. Now, going on to number 2, consumers in business. Again, these are the outcomes that are relevant to that unit of work. Examining economic issues, applying economic skills, the role of consumers in society, the role of business in the economy. Even if you wanted to do something like definition of a firm in an industry, a firm's production decisions, what to produce, what quantities to produce, how to produce, you could do that. And then in your second topic, look at a case study of a specific firm. That's an example. The case study way is really the way to go. All right, and markets. So going through, have a look through all the different units, see what interests you. Yeah, and probably going that case study way. Now, in terms of what constitutes 4 hours of work, you probably wouldn't want to go more than 2 or 3 dot points. You definitely wouldn't be, grabbing all of this. There'd just be, I'd probably say no way that you do all that. So just be mindful of maybe 2 to 3 dot points for an inquiry sequence. But again, flicking back to how many hours, 20% of indicative time, you go back to that first section where it lists the amount of hours, you can sort of get an idea of how long that unit should take, and then go from there about 4 hours, okay? But again, it's not so clear cut that if you have 6 sections in the markets unit, that each section is going to be the 4 hours necessarily, because some will take longer to teach than others. And how are you supposed to know that when you haven't taught anything yet, or you haven't been in the classroom really that much? Just take a guess. Just try your best, see how you go. Even when you go into teaching, sometimes what you think you want to get done in 4 hours ends up taking longer, or you get through it quicker. All right, let's go to the next one, which is geography. So this one is the new one. Okay, so this is going to look a little bit different. So in year 11, we've got Earth's natural systems, people, patterns, and processes, human environment interactions, geographical investigation. I would say don't do the geographical information. You just want to do one of these 3 units in year 11. Global sustainability, rural and urban places, ecosystems, and global biodiversity. Again, it shows you how many hours. So in year 11, 120 hours, tells you 40 and 40 for the first 2, 20. But again, we're not going to do geographical investigation because that means it'll be different for each student, and we just want to have one specific focus. So I wouldn't do that one. Then again, the amount of hours for year 12. So going to the units of work, now this one's a little bit different in terms of the outcome table because it's not separated into really easy to understand knowledge and understanding outcomes versus skill-based outcomes. But if you use this outcomes table, then you will see that I've put it into sections for you. So you'll know what's knowledge and understanding and what is skill-based. Interesting to note that, yeah, like I've said before, sometimes it's just a difference of the cognitive verb. This one's applies, this one's selects and applies. 11-8 applies mathematical ideas and techniques to analyze geographical data, applies mathematical ideas and techniques to analyze complex geographical data. So it's not just geographical data, but it's complex. All right, so the first unit, we've got the skills. So you'll notice that in the new geography syllabus, there's a strong focus on those 3 main inquiry skills, which we learned about in the 7 to 10 mandatory syllabuses, where we had that chart and the table, where we had the acquiring, processing, and applying or communicating geographical information. We've got the tools that are important for each of these units of work. And this is the first unit, Earth's natural systems. This shows us what outcomes are applicable for that unit. So when you look at this outcome table, we don't know which ones are for which unit, but here you can tell. What's interesting about the new syllabus is that it's a little bit less detailed. So you're going to be responsible for sort of deciphering what you will want students to inquire about. So for example, nature as a source of wonder, and then it just gives you examples. It's a little bit less guided, isn't it? What you could do if you're feeling a little bit lost with some of this is ask me first if you want. You could also go and have a look at the old geography syllabus if you want some guidance on how to break down some of these. A lot of the units will be the same, some will be a little bit different, because that doesn't really say a lot. That's the content area. And the examples are just that, the examples. You can also look at the support material that's there. I think I've uploaded that. If not, you can get on the NESA website to sort of support you on what you could be looking at in each of these sections. So the content areas that you will be focusing on you'll be copying and pasting that. In terms of what's 4 hours of work, really some of these dot points on their own, number one could be 4 hours of work. So you might just be copying that. Because 4 hours of work you could look at processes, cycles, and circulations connecting natural systems. In terms of what should you focus on because you have that second topic that you need to be thinking about. For example, you could do the universal value of Earth's environments, looking at intrinsic value, and then in your second topic, looking at the global commons. That's an idea. I probably wouldn't do something like this for your learning sequence. I don't think that's a learning sequence type of content, to be honest. This unit's probably not a great unit to choose. The first one, nature as a source of wonder. You could do a second topic there. Great wildlife migrations across air, land, and sea. And choosing these two or one of those for the learning sequence. Let's have a look at the second unit. People, patterns, and processes. I bet you there'll be something here. The integrated nature of the world. So this tells you more specifically, these blue sort of boxes, what you need to cover. So you could focus on that for your learning sequence. And have students think about the effect of technological change across different places. Migration, this one would be an easy one to do. Not easy, but like it would be good to do that one. So unit 2 would actually be probably a little bit easier than the first one, I'd say. Let's look at unit 3 in year 11. Human environment interactions. This will have something, I bet. A geographic region. That would be a good one because it's kind of like the case study style, which you will find will be very helpful. That would be a good one to do for a learning sequence because you could look at one region and look at another one for your second topic. A contemporary hazard, same sort of idea. I'm liking that unit number 3, unit 2 and 3 so far. It's quite good. Again, don't do geographical investigation. Don't do that one. It looks like they haven't really looked at the syllabus to a great extent just yet, but it looks like it's a very research-based one. We want all students to sort of be doing the same thing. So year 12, same idea, global sustainability. This would be a good one, investigation of a global economic activity. That would be good. Rural and urban places, that looks like a really good unit. You could look at different settlement areas for the inquiry sequence in that second topic. That would be good as well. Global biodiversity, different ecosystems. There's quite a bit there. You could really do any of these units except maybe geographical investigation. Maybe that first one might be a little bit difficult as well. So maybe steer clear of those. But in terms of 4 hours of work, I've sort of went over that. And in terms of, we went through the different units of work, which is good. So I think that that's pretty good. Making sure you come back to this outcomes table and that you choose, you know, obviously only a year 11 outcome for year 11, year 12 for year 12. Okay. All right, let's go on to legal studies. All right, so legal studies looks similar to what we've looked at before with some of these other ones. The rationale, the aim and objectives. The outcomes are put into a table similar to what we've been used to. The objectives sort of linking which outcomes go with which objective. And I've put that here in this table. So we've got the objectives, and the outcomes, knowledge and understanding, skill-based outcomes, not using the communicate. All right, so in year 11, students are looking at the legal system, the individual and the law and practice. In year 12, students are looking at crime, human rights, and then there are different options, so you can choose one of these. You can basically do any of these units. I think any of them would be quite good. Now this one's, I remember this now. The way that this is set up is a little bit different from what you're going to see in other stage 6 syllabuses. So this is the first unit of work, the legal system. These are the themes of what students are looking at, and these are the content areas. So for example, if you wanted to choose this first unit of work, you probably wouldn't look at basic legal concepts. That's sort of like a foundational type study. I wouldn't be doing that. Sources of a contemporary Australian law, common law. Probably wouldn't do that one either. Well, you'd sort of do a second topic on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's customary laws as a second topic. That wouldn't be a bad idea. Or international law to sort of compare and contrast between Australian law. That would be not a bad idea. In terms of how to copy the content here, I remember this from another year. This is often a question that gets asked for the legal studies. It's broken down to what students learn about and what students learn to do. What you can do is just copy this left column, what students learn about. So for example, if you did want to focus on this one here, then you would just copy that section. Now, unit 2, the individual and the law. Resolving disputes. Any section of the syllabus that has sort of like examples or case studies is a really good idea. So for example, the individual and technology, now this would be a good unit actually, or a good topic in a unit, because you could focus on the impacts of technology and look at a couple of these examples, and then maybe that second topic could be a couple more examples to build on what they've learned about the individual and technology and those sort of rights. Yeah, that's actually a good idea. So look for those sort of sections where there's options for things like, you know, students can look at this and then they can also look at this. Those sort of topics are a really good idea. This is an interesting one, young offenders. I think students have done that one before. It's pretty interesting. Looking at sentencing and punishment, and then sort of that second topic being like the young offenders perspective, children's court, international crime. There's another one, human rights. So this would be a good one too, because you can do something on Australian human rights and then sort of that global perspective. And let's look at, there's some examples here. Abuse of children, torture, capital punishment, looking at contemporary issue and how, so one of these contemporary issues, maybe globally, you could do that. So yeah, that's pretty much what I would do, is doing one of those option ones. So again, coming back to here, making sure you choose from the right one for your topic. Yeah, so just keeping in mind that the case studies are really the way to go, I think, in the legal studies one. It's a little bit more difficult to find that content, but sticking to that left side, I think, is key. All right, let's go on to modern history. All right, modern history is set up similar to ancient history, but I'm mindful of the fact that those of you who are doing modern history probably didn't watch the ancient history one, so I'll just go through this one again. So this one looks very similar to the 7 to 10 syllabus. That's because it was written in 2017 and updated, so it's not that old, really. I don't suspect there'll be a lot of difference in the new one. But anyways, the aim is here for stage 6. Objectives, knowledge and understanding, skills. Okay, we've got our objectives and outcomes table. So if you go to this table that I've uploaded, I've put the objectives here and also the outcomes that relate to knowledge and understanding and those that relate to skill-based outcomes and not using to communicate. That's broken down there. Skills here. Knowledge and understanding. All right, so how is year 11 broken up? Similar to the ancient history, very similar. We've got investigating modern history, so the nature of modern history and case studies, that's 60 hours in year 11. And then students study historical investigation and then the shaping of the modern world, so 20 and 40 hours. So keep that in mind when you're thinking that you need to do a learning sequence that's 4 hours, okay? Now, in that first unit here, students are looking at, again, the nature of modern history. And then they're also doing 2 case studies. One of the case studies needs to be from Europe, North America, Australia, and then the second one from these options just down here. See here? All right, now we'll go through the year 12 structure in a moment. Let's just stick with year 11 so we don't get too confused. All right, so here it is again, a bit repetitive. All right, so the first one again is investigating modern history. The content you are choosing is from one of these: the investigation of historic sites and sources, the contestability of the past, construction of modern histories, and so forth. You're choosing one of those in modern history, okay? And these are the outcomes that pertain to any one of these options here. So you could choose number 3, 4, or 5, it doesn't matter. These outcomes are all relevant to those units of work. This is the first one. This is the second one. This is the third one, and so forth. They're all listed there. So there's not really a lot there, but you're using case studies to sort of build the content. So for example, contestability of the past. There's a lot of different examples that you could use. You can think of some of your own as well. And this can really help you when you are thinking about your second topic as well. So if we want to look at sort of history and memory, say that's something that you wanted to do your learning sequence on. You might want to look at the nature of history compared to memoir, including oral accounts and natural ceremonies, the contribution of oral history to our understanding of the past. Say that's what you chose as your content area. Then you may look at excerpts from memoirs or autobiographies as your sources, but related to the Vietnam War. And then maybe your second topic might be similar sort of sources, but related to the fall of the Berlin Wall, for example. So that's how you can work it in history. And this was the same for the ancient history. You're using these types of examples to do your learning sequence and then that second topic. Remembering that that second topic is the student's opportunity to build on what they've learned. So maybe see that things weren't exactly the same in memoirs about the Vietnam War as there were in memoirs about the fall of the Berlin Wall. How are they different? How are they the same? And so forth. So the case studies are a really good idea. Going down to the actual case studies, now this is another option too. Remember that you have to choose one from list A, one from list B when you are teaching modern history. No matter which case studies you choose, these outcomes are related to those case studies. So if you look at the transatlantic slave trade, you are teaching to these outcomes. Or if you are looking at the British and India and Burma, you are teaching these outcomes. They're all related. This is another way that you could design your learning sequence. You could focus on the content. So for example, Australia and the rise of communism, and look at the nature of the communist presence in Australia and Asia. So you could focus on Australia and then maybe Asia in that second topic if you wanted to. Or what you could do is you really have to design your sequence question very generally if you wanted to look at the transatlantic slave trade in the American Civil War. It'd have to be really general. You'd have to think about how those two topics really connect so that you could have students build one on the other. So do those two relate enough, A5 and A6, that you could actually have that first topic and second topic and bring them together. It might not be. You might not be able to. What you might have to do is go to each individual unit and then decide how you can, do the Australia and Asia sort of focus or something else. So you really have to be, thinking about that. Now, for example, if you wanted to see how it gives you examples for individuals for study, what you can do is if you wanted to do, so for example, this unit, you could focus on one or two of these people for the sequence and then or 3 or 4, you want to do group work, and then bring in like that other person, that 5th person, to sort of give it a little bit of twist and a new understanding. So have a look at all those different case studies that are listed there. Now going on to, so we've got the A's and the B's. We've got historical investigation, the shaping of the modern world. Now this is interesting too as a unit. Students are looking at one of these topics, so the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, the age of imperialism, blah, blah, blah. What you could do is you could choose 2 of these. But again, if you're going to do that, you really need to have a think about how World War I relates to the industrial age, for example. Be a very general question that students could be involved in a learning sequence about the industrial age, and then also then extend into World War I. So how do they link? What sort of question could you have that overarches both of those 2 different topics? Okay, that's what you really need to be thinking about in the modern history syllabus. Now in year 12, students have to do the core study of power and authority in the modern world, 1919 to 1946. And they're looking at national studies, peace and conflict, and change in the modern world. Now, here are your topics here. So going down and looking at these, this is that core study. In terms of the second topic, you might not want to do the core study unless you can think of how you can bring in that second topic. It might be a bit difficult there. The national studies might be a little bit easier. So you're looking at different features, individuals, groups, events, and developments that shaped the history of a selected nation. So you could have a general question, overarching question that looks at how the modern world was shaped within one context, and then the second topic could be a second context, so Japan or whatever. Okay, so that would be an option there. So the different options, you can have a read through them. There's a lot here, but remembering you don't teach all of this. It's really just teaching, 1 out of 12 options. Okay, so you have to have a look through and see what could go together and keeping that sequence question very general. And remembering that in all of the sections of the units of work, so options, change in the modern world, these are all these options here again are informed by these outcomes. All right, let's go to society and culture. All right, this syllabus is really not the easiest to understand. It'd be good to see what they do with the new one. Okay, there's a rationale, the aim, objectives, course structure. So in year 11, students have to study the social and cultural world first, personal and social identity, intercultural communication. Year 12, they have to do the social and cultural continuity and change unit. They do a personal interest project, and then they choose two out of the 4 options in these studies here. Do not do a learning sequence based on the personal interest project. Okay, don't do that. It won't work really that well. So there's some definitions. Again, here are the objectives and outcomes. So if you have a look at the table that I've uploaded, I've got the objectives into knowledge and understanding, skill-based objectives, and then the codes for each of these. So making sure you pick the right one for each outcome that you need to use. Now, going into units of work. Just before I do that, I will say those of you who are planning to teach society and culture, there is a strong focus on research methods. So you do need to be quite familiar with quantitative methods and qualitative methods. I just wanted to preface any learning that you do about this syllabus with that. If you haven't studied a society and culture in years 11 and 12 yourself, and that's something that you do need to be familiar with so that you can teach your students. All right. A lot of stuff on research methods in the syllabus, which is handy. All right, so the first unit in year 11 is the social and cultural world. We know that these outcomes are relevant to that unit of work. We know that it's 30% of course time, so it's about 1 term, about 10 weeks worth. It's probably about 30 hours. I can't remember what it said at the beginning, so go back and have a look. This one's not really easy either to sort of draw on. You will not be copying content from here. This just lists in each unit of work the different concepts that are relevant to that unit. So for this unit, you'll head down to, say, for example, the nature of the social and cultural world. Look for the sections which have options. So for example, students might learn about the nature of the social and cultural world, and then maybe extend in that second topic, looking at one of the following groups or 2 of the following groups to sort of extend that learning. That's an option. Now you'll notice that in each of the units of work, there is a section on research methods. So you'll notice in this unit, the first unit, there's a focus on quantitative and qualitative research overall. Then you'll notice in unit 2, students are looking at questionnaires. Unit 3, It is interviews. Do not do your inquiry sequence on any research methods for society and culture. That also means that it doesn't really work. When you look at the skill-based outcomes, we've got 7 and 9. I've said not to use 8 or 10. There's a reason for that. Right, do not use 8 or 10. So 8 is plans and conducts ethical, social, and cultural research. And obviously we've got the communicates we're not using. If you want to, you can use P8 or H8, but what I have found is that the teaching of research in these units, as you can see, is sectioned in each unit of work. There is something that they have to learn about research in those sections. But the teaching of those research methods often needs to sit outside of a learning sequence. So really the only skill that you can really focus on for society and culture is using appropriate course language and concepts. So getting them to use those for different contexts and audiences. Or selects and organizes information. So from a variety of sources, so bias and so forth. I wouldn't be teaching any research methods. I mean, you can have it in there if you want, but I've often found that students who are choosing the society and culture syllabus really struggle to grapple with teaching research methods and having them engage in some knowledge and understanding learning within a certain context. So I wouldn't choose that skill. That's why I put that as not an option. So see in the core unit in year 12, social and cultural continuity and change, methods, I wouldn't do any of that. Don't choose that. I wouldn't choose that at all. If you wanted to do something like examine the impact of technologies, you could look at different countries from, the inquiry sequence to the second topic. That would be an option. Knowledge and understanding of social and continuity and change by examining structural changes within society. Again, you could look at different societies to see what those changes are, that type of case study sort of thing. And also the focus study is always handy. So if you have the textbook, there's a focus study in each unit of work, and you could use that as your second topic if you wanted to. Popular culture, this is one that students often use. And you'll notice that at the end, there's different options. So for example, you might have your inquiry sequence on fashion and film. And then your second topic could be on literature or sport or some type of toy, but with the focus area within these sections. So what's 4 hours of work? Probably a few dot points, but remembering if you choose something, for example, down here, then your prior knowledge will really have to demonstrate that students have studied. This first section here, it's important to know about the origins of popular culture before you talk about the continuities and changes. So knowing that origin leads to understanding continuity and change, right? So you can put that in your prior knowledge. But in terms of what's 4 hours, again, probably 2 to 3 dot points. But see how you go. Often what we plan in 4 hours of work doesn't end up working. As you design your sequence, you'll be able to tell whether this is feeling like a bit too much, or I'm not addressing everything here. So you might have to remove some dot points. So just see how you go. Belief systems. So there's different belief systems and ideologies you could have as that second topic. Social inclusion and exclusion. Employment, healthcare. So each of these units, which is the good thing about society and culture, is they give you different sort of examples of what you can focus on. So you can choose any of these examples within the units of work while focusing on a content area like that. So the perspective of education in, belief systems, cultural practices, people with disability, and so forth. Okay, so remembering, make sure that you don't go outside of these and that you don't use anything that's not within these two sections, not using any of these for society and culture. All right, going on to studies of religion. All right, so this is an older one. Be good to see this one updated as well. Rationale, aim, and objectives. And you'll see by looking at the table here that I've put all the objectives related to knowledge and understanding here and skill-based objectives here. Again, what codes go with knowledge and understanding and what goes with skill-based. You've really only got P8 or H8 for this one. All right, so the first unit of work is Nature of Religion and Beliefs, Religious Tradition Study 1, and Religious Tradition Study 2. Studies of Religion number 2, these are your options here for year 11. So preliminary means year 11, and HSC is year 12. So we've got the outcomes table, which basically aligns the objectives really nicely against the year 11 preliminary outcomes and the HSC year 12 outcomes, which is pretty handy, a bit different from the history one. Now, in terms of topics, the one thing I will say to keep note of is how many hours. So for example, the nature of religion and beliefs, 16 hours. So if you need to do 4 hours of work, which is what you need to do for this learning sequence, then sort of breaking that down, that knowing that unit of work is 16, what would 4 hours look like potentially within that 16? So knowing that it's 16 hours and not 100 can sort of give you a bit of an idea. That's not going to be a perfect sort of response. You go into teaching with all these plans and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So it's just a preliminary idea of what we think 4 hours might look like. Now this one's a bit similar to the legal studies one. What I would do for copying content is just focus on the left column. Don't worry about what students need to learn to do, although that can help inform how you teach the content here. In terms of how you want to roll this with your second topic, you could focus on Buddhism for example, your learning sequence. And then you might focus on maybe Christianity as a second topic. I've seen students do that, which means you'd have 2 different content areas. So the historical and cultural context in which Christianity began. And if we go back to Buddhism, we can see that it's the same sort of focus. So you could do those 2. That would be a really good idea. So looking for ways in which they align the different units of work. Yeah, that one's pretty easy to do, I think. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that for each of the units of work, for example, Islam, these are the outcomes that are relevant to the study of Islam. So there's no P1 or P2. Just keeping that in mind. So the first unit of work, the nature of religion and beliefs, we can see that's where P1 and P2 come through. All right, so I think that's it for this video. I'm not sure if anybody's actually watched the whole thing, but if you have any questions about any of the syllabuses or anything that I've said in this video, ask me, put it on the discussion board, send me an email. Probably better to put on the discussion board first. That way other students can sort of see what questions are being asked and maybe an answer that I give. They might have the same question as you. But other than that, I hope that you've enjoyed this video and it's helped you a little bit. But again, any questions, just ask me. All right, talk to you soon, everyone. Bye.